Hello again, everyone, and welcome to tonight's Expert Insights presentation on digital accessibility. We'll be talking about what this means for us as we think about accessibility and how we get started with 10 tips from Dr. Cheryl Bergstahler. Next slide, please, Cheryl. My name is Stacy Fonts. Again, welcome. I'm a program manager here at the University of Washington's Continuum College. At the Continuum College, my work, as well as my peers, is to expand the reach of the university on a global scale by breaking down barriers to make education possible for all types of learners. Next slide, please. Within our professional and continuing education division, which is a subset of the Continuum College, we work hard to give professionals the educational experiences they need to thrive in an ever-changing world. In my work, I get to connect with amazing professionals across industry, all playing a role in the impact we make in transforming the lives of learners wherever they are in life and wherever they want to go. This is especially true of our presenter today. Before we get started, a quick moment here to again thank you for joining us today and participating in this ongoing Expert Insight series. In these free webinar series, we feature one of our expert instructors to share what's trending in their field, the, the tools they're using, tips that might help you, especially as you look to advance and develop in your career. At the end of today's presentation, we will have a short amount of time for Q&A. Please use the Q&A feature within this webinar to submit questions to us. And then again, we will do our best to answer them at the end. Next slide, please. This is our quick disclaimer before we get going. Please know that this presentation is not designed to answer every question or be an interpretation of the law or be an offering of legal advice. But this is an important starting point for us in our work and everyday lives to understand how we can be inclusive and make an impact in our digital world. So, without further ado, my formal introduction, of the amazing Dr. Cheryl Bergstahler. It is my pleasure to be with Cheryl tonight. She is not only an outstanding human being, but a global leader in IT accessibility and advocacy. She has spent over 4 decades at the University of Washington, where she has either built or had a strong presence in what our great institution uses today to ensure we meet the needs of all learners regardless of ability. She is the founder and retired director of UW Accessible Technology Services and UW Do It, the university's Disabilities Opportunities Internetworking and Technology Center. That center's mission is to advance the success of people with disabilities in education, research, and careers around the world. She is an advocate for universal design of learning, which ensures facilities, so physical spaces, as well as websites, media, documents, and other information technology and services are accessible to, usable by, and inclusive of individuals with disabilities. She is a published author, co-author, and has delivered countless presentations all over the globe as a speaker and consultant. She is, she has numerous awards that recognize her leadership and support of students with disabilities. In her very active retirement, she continues to educate others as an affiliate professor here at the University of Washington. Cheryl and I are excited to introduce a new course in web and digital accessibility that starts at the beginning of, at the end of this, no, beginning of April. Applications are now open and are being accepted through March 24th. If you're motivated by accessibility and usability for all, we'd welcome you to be part of our inaugural spring cohort. We see this course as a way for technical and non-technical professionals to deepen their knowledge by building a foundation in web and digital accessibility, to be able to differentiate themselves and say they are skilled in creating digitally accessible content, and to increase career opportunities by closing the accessibility skill gap. Information about this new course is included at a slide at the end of the deck. I believe I've worked with Cheryl for about 10 years now. And again, I wish to acknowledge her excellence and express my gratitude for her humility and continued leadership. I always look forward to learning from you, Cheryl, and I'm excited to share this learning opportunity with our guests tonight. Thank you, Cheryl. It's all yours.
Well, thank you. We'll start with talking about the value of accessibility of web and mobile content. And I'd like to share how some of the practices I'm going to be sharing and the tips come from a similar experience I had back in 2017 when Policy 188 on IT accessibility uh, was enacted in the state of Washington. It applied to all state entities, including post-secondary education. And so I was the leader of that effort for the University of Washington. It actually points to the same standards that the new Department of Justice is pointing to, well-established standards for many institutions already. And also the models and the frameworks that I have thought through were developed during that time. So don't currently work at the University of Washington. I'm not leading those efforts, but I left it in very capable hands. But I'm sharing those experiences from the past. So when we work with people with disabilities in our programs and all of our activities in the Do It Center and the IT accessibility team as well, is when working with disabled individuals, we promote self-determination. So they fit in and making sure that they have the skills and the networking and everything they need, including technology, so that they can make decisions in their life, including for employment, education, and other adult activities. But now we're talking about working with institutions and faculty and staff and technology companies and so forth. And then I've employed the model of universal design, which can be applied to the physical spaces, the technology, the learning activities, the services, and so forth. A real broad framework to allow us to think about the efforts that we're making. Very short history. We think about the responses to human differences, particularly with people with disabilities. As human beings, we have a history of eliminating people with disabilities, excluding them, segregating them, many years in that area. But very active, particularly in the middle of the last century. A lot of medical improvements were made and discovered, and there were efforts to cure people of their disabilities, and if not cure them, to rehabilitate them. So physical therapy, occupational therapy, those types of fields. And then if that didn't give them full access to something, then we accommodated them. So we made a special case of a person with a disability and try to meet their individual needs. Nothing wrong with curing or rehabilitating or accommodating, but they don't focus on making the whole environment more inclusive. And so the current state we're in, when we talk about disability justice and so forth, is civil rights. People with disabilities just simply have a right to access to the technology that we're developing, procuring, using, whatever. And that is the social justice perspective. And then when you think about how you're going to apply that perspective, it kind of comes out as inclusion and universal design, both proactive approaches to making things more accessible, inclusive, and usable. So when you look at accommodations only approach, you adjust an existing product or environment. There are some IT examples. When you remediate an inaccessible web page or documents to make them accessible to one person with a disability. In other words, you have a complaint maybe by a blind student said, this website doesn't work for me. That's an accommodation for that one student. Captioning videos is another when you do it reactively. So if the video in your class doesn't have accurate captions, making those captions accurate for a person who is deaf and relies on them, that would be an accommodation. If you do it proactively, that's universal design. If you make all your videos captioned accurately right from the get-go, then that's what universal design is all about. It does have a definition and a long history. Universal design is the design of products and environments to be usable by all people to the greatest extent possible without the need for adaptation or specialized design. There are actually three characteristics of a universally designed product, including an IT product, that it's technically accessible. And so there are ways for a person who has a disability to use that product, that software, that online course. They technically can use it, but we all know that sometimes things are maybe even accessible to us, but they really aren't very usable. And so usability is always involved when you talk about universal design. We want it to be technically accessible, but we also want to make sure that it's usable, that a person with a disability can find what they need to do and make choices in their selection of content and whatever anybody else does on that website or application. And then it's also inclusion. Inclusive in this context means that we want to make sure that students with disabilities, faculty, staff with disabilities are using the same technologies as other individuals. And so building in accessibility is much preferred than creating a separate product, for example. So that's what universal design is all about. It embraces a social model of disability. It considers diversity as a disability as a diversity issue. It ties in with civil rights, and it also emphasizes intersectionality. And so that a person with a disability doesn't just have one characteristic. A person who's blind will also be a man or a woman or have certain political orientation and so forth. And so we think about all those characteristics coming together, then all making a difference in how they can use technology. So let's get back to that ruling that we're buzzing about all over the country. Department of Justice ruling from April 24th, 2024. So I was still around at the university when that came out. Non-discrimination on the basis of disability, accessibility of web content and mobile apps provided by state and local governments. So it's a real mouthful, the title of that, but it's all about IT accessibility. The final rule is under Title II of the Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990, including its 2008 amendments. Many people have the wrong idea and they think this is a new law. It's like Policy 188. Policy 188 in the state of Washington wasn't a new law. It was just telling us how to comply with existing laws. Most connected with Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, which goes back a long way, but also the Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990. And so it's not a new law. It's kind of like when you look at uh, physical environments. You know, there were laws about making sure our physical environments were accessible to people with disabilities before there were standards. Now we know there are standards where you have the width of the door and how you should organize a bathroom and that sort of thing. And so this is what's happening here is we kind of giving some guideposts for people to comply with the law that already exists. So it clarifies basically our obligations as far as state and local governments with respect to the Americans with Disabilities Act and IT. And it ensures that no person with a disability is denied access to whatever we're doing, government services, programs, activities here at the University of Washington, courses, student services, just everything we provide. And it mandates the technical standards to ensure the accessibility of programs and services are provided through the web and mobile applications. So that's where we get to these standards that are really important that tell us what we really need to do to comply with this ruling. And so it advances in general the promise of a more inclusive society. We've had the law around a long time, and if we were all doing it really well, we probably wouldn't need a rule. But we clearly need a rule to encourage people to meet the ADA
I'm going to jump in
guidelines. Some
real
people,
quick, Cheryl.
what?
I haven't asked if you would slow down your speed real quick.
Okay.
You're just so excited. I know, I get it.
This is not the fun part. So I'm just kind of like,
Yeah.
oh, I just want to get through this part. I'll slow down. Thank you. Um, what is Title II? It's under Title II of the ADA. Well, it's a good place for this because it's Title II is what requires that state and local governments make their services, programs, activities accessible to people with disabilities. And those include those offered on the web and through mobile apps. So that's why it's particularly tied to that part of the ADA. So what is a rule? Well, the rule is the regulation that includes a set of requirements issued by a federal agency for laws that have already been passed by Congress. And so that's what a rule is about. And again, I gave the example of physical environment that we have standards that come after we have the legislation. So who does this apply to? Pretty much everyone that's you're paid by through the state. You're probably an organization that complies with this. State and local entities, in the rule, it gives a lot of examples. This is not the total number of things that you could list, but government offices that provide benefits or social services like food assistance, health insurance, employment services. You might think, well, how can they be included? Well, most of those services probably are up on the web. And so this new ruling will tell them how to make sure their websites are accessible and usable for people with disabilities that want to use their services. So that's how that ties in with all of these. But you can think about the police department, courts, election offices. Those are all and many more entities are covered by the Department of Justice ruling. And then public entities, school districts. So here we bring in public school districts, community colleges, universities, hospitals and healthcare clinics, parks and recreation programs, libraries, and transit agencies. So we're talking about public entities, but what usually happens when a rule like this is passed, just like 188 for the state of Washington, many people that are maybe at private institutions and others that aren't required to comply, they actually will look to these rulings for guidance as well. So the technical standards points to the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, version 2.1 level double A. That is the same guideline that our policy 188 points to as well. There's actually a newer version 2.2 of WCAG, but it's my understanding that the government's pointing to 2.1 at this point because there's so many resources that have been developed because 2.1 has been around for a while. There's some exceptions, but you'll have a hard time finding one that maybe will allow you not to comply because it's just kind of very specific things like archived web content, pre-existing electronic documents on individuals' password protected documents, but not the course materials. It does apply to all course materials. But if you have some personal files that you've saved on your desktop, for example, and you're not going to be published on the web or something, then you don't have to have those be in accessible format. And then some old social media posts. We're not going to have to go back and then remediate all of those. So, but in those cases, you need to provide accommodations for individual requesters. So let's say you have a document that you don't have published, but it's a document that you have, and someone asks for that document. Depending on the document, you may need to provide it in an accessible format. So 2.1, developed by the Web Accessibility Initiative, which is an organization of the World Wide Web Consortium, which makes a lot of the rules for how we use the web. So WCAG includes principles that IT, for example, is perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. So that those are the basic principles we're looking at. So whatever IT that you're looking at to comply with the Department of Justice ruling, those are the four things you should be shooting for. But some of those are kind of vague. We might not know what it really means. And so that's where we get the guidelines underneath these principles. What guidelines are they to make sure that you are following those principles? And then under the guidelines, they have individual practices or success criteria, they call them, that apply to websites, web applications, mobile applications, videos, digital documents, and other technology. And so that's what we have. Even though it's a web content accessibility guidelines, it applies to more technology than the web. You can use these broad guidelines as specific practices for software and so forth. It actually covers even more than making things accessible to people with disabilities. For example, in one of the success criteria deal with making sure that your content is accessible to people who are colorblind. Even though the word blind is in that descriptor, color blindness is not a disability. So it goes broader, which I think of as more a universal design set of guidelines, not just an accessibility set of guidelines. Sometimes it helps to put a person, to have a face on who this impacts. And I think, when you're developing your IT or remediating it or whatever you're doing, to think of four people and that I know these people, but they've been involved in our programs and staff. Then if you make your website or your technology inclusive to these four people, then you pretty much will meet the needs of other people as well. So I'll just kind of breeze through here. But Zane is the first person we have on the screen, and she's deaf. And so, of course, what's important to her is that we caption those videos. Do you put up a video on YouTube and maybe link to it? Do you go back and edit those automatically developed captions? Those are computer generated, and people like to make fun of the silly captions on YouTube videos. But for me, it just indicates that people don't realize that they should consider those captions just a draft. Computer generated them. And granted, with AI now, we're getting better and better, uh, captions, but still they'll never be perfect. And so it's kind of a mean trick when you think about it for Zane. If you have a video as an introduction to your course that she's in, and there are misspellings and there's no punctuation, that's kind of a mean trick for her. She's not really going to be able to maybe get all the information that you're giving to your other students. And so pre-captioning your videos before you put them in your class, proactively doing that, not waiting for disability services to do it for a particular student. And that's not that hard to do. Anthony was a student in the Do It program, and he has multiple disabilities. He has some but limited use of his hands, and he does not have a usable voice. He uses all types of technology. He's actually provides phone support for people using assistive technology in his career. And so he needs to use a telephone. So he has an interface to that. He can't use a standard keyboard. So he has a keyboard that has larger keys so that he can zero in on those keys. And he has some other assistive technologies that allow him to use that telephone and to control his environment and whatever. It would be fun for half a day to learn of all the things that Anthony uses in his daily life. So he's a great example. But the thing is, you don't have to become an expert on all that technology that he uses and all the many of thousands of other assistive technologies for people with disabilities. You just need to do one thing. One main thing is that all of those technologies together will emulate the keyboard. Anything that you can do on the keyboard, Anthony can do, but they won't necessarily emulate the mouse. And so if you're developing a pull down menu on a web page, make sure that even though you expect someone to use a mouse, that they also could use, for example, arrow keys to activate any commands that someone would do with their mouse. So making sure everything's accessible with a keyboard only for Anthony. Then there's Jessie. Jessie has multiple learning disabilities. She has difficulty getting her thoughts down on paper or even on in the keyboard. And so she uses dictation software to do that. She also has difficulty reading, and so she uses text to speech software, which reads all the text to her, whether it's in a document or in its on a web page, maybe the content page of your class, and so forth. So for Jessie, it's really important that her text to speech software can read the text. And sometimes our PDFs, for example, they look like they have images in there, or they have characters, text in them, but it's not really text. It's images of text. You can tell by just trying to scroll over, kind of connect, try to select some words. And if you do that and you can't select any words, then that means it's not a text-based document. It is an image. And some PDFs are that way. And so when Jessie takes a class, she needs to make sure that all the documents are reformatted if they don't have access, she doesn't have access to the text. Alternatively, you could design your documents so that they are text-based and accessible to Jessie. And then she wouldn't need those accommodations and it would help other people as well. Specifically, Hadi. Hadi actually works at the University of Washington in the IT accessibility team, and he's blind. He actually has taught online. And so he comes from the faculty perspective when it comes to a class. But basically, Hadi needs that text-based content as well as Jessie. But he needs more than that. Jessie can see the formatting of a document and Hadi cannot. And so those things like heading structure, we have heading one, heading two, heading two, heading one, and so forth. Those are really important for Hadi because the screen reader he uses can read aloud the heading text. And so he could go through a very dense academic paper and read all the headings and subheadings. And so he gets to scroll through the document like that others might use their sight for, and see how it's organized. And he might find he only wants to be reading, this section with heading two in the first section. And so that's important to him. Formatting, structuring your documents. Similarly, when he looks at a web page, could be in a class or it could be in a website, he would like to sometimes look through all of the links on that page. Those with sight can look at that page and see all the links and what they're linking to, and perhaps using the surrounding text if they need to. So what Hadi benefits from is whenever you have a linked text the underlying portion to it's going to link to some other resource, that be descriptive. Some people like to make their pages look nice and clean by having all a consistency where all of those links are click here, click here, click here, click here. But for Hadi, that's not very useful. If he skips through all of those links, he still doesn't know what's at them. So he needs to read the surrounding text or actually access all those links in order to figure out what's on there. So there are other things as far as formatting lists and formatting tables and so forth that benefit Hadi. So again, I'm putting a face on some of these accessibility issues, but if you make your course or your website or other IT application accessible to Zane, Anthony, Jesse, and Hadi, that will be accessible to just everybody, almost everybody else as well. So think of those four people. So what are some of the WCAG 2.1 practices? Um, describing them is often easy, but sometimes it takes technical expertise to implement them. I've already mentioned captioning videos is one of the practices, and include alternative text for images. So that would be for Hadi. If you have an image on the screen, Hadi can't see it. But if you include some alternative text, it won't appear on the screen, but Hadi's screen reader will know that it's there. And so he will be able to get a description of that image. That's why it's so important that they have good descriptions of images. They don't have to be long and complicated. Mainly just think about what content do I need Hadi to understand from this image. Even if it's decorative, that's useful for Hadi. So you can just indicate that it's decorative and he knows that he hasn't missed valuable content. And as I mentioned for Hadi as well, formatting those headings, heading one, heading two, that's structured is automatically in your learning management system and in your Word document and so forth. Just use it. It's already there. Lists, I think most people use list structure now, but if you just decide to put those little dots in individually, that will, Hadi will not know he's coming up to a list to read. And then tables and so forth. And then I already mentioned using descriptive wording for hyperlinks, providing keyboard access for Anthony so that he doesn't have to use the mouse. And have a big one is using adequate contrast. In this presentation today, I'm really paying attention to that. And so there's a lot of contrast, but also no images in the background that can be distracting. So these are 10 tips. And again, most of these were developed after implementing policy 188 for the state of Washington, but I selected some that I think still apply with this new Department of Justice ruling. So hopefully you can learn from what we did years ago. We promoted digital accessibility within the context of social justice and an inclusive workplace, campus, and using it in a universal design framework. And so when we developed our practices, we thought, now what is the scope of all of this in policy 188? What types of technologies? Just about any of them, by the way, kind of like Department of Justice, but it's not a bad idea for your task force or some subcommittee to just list them. What are we looking at here? The websites, content management systems, the pages that they generate, specific software, and then prioritize. We have thousands of products used at the University of Washington. So how are you going to prioritize that? Often it's based on, well, how many people are going to be using it, or how important is it that everybody can use it? And so you have the scope, and then your definition. We use universal design. You may find something else works better for you as far as a framework, but have one. What is it you're talking about? Um, and principles, I talked about the WCAG principles. There are others to look at too. And the guidelines that follow those practices and process. And as I mentioned earlier, the Universal Design Framework has a lot of history. And so we have principles, guidelines, and practices. Even the WCAG guidelines and practices were developed many years ago. And so there's a long history, a lot of involvement by people with disabilities. So you're not stuck coming up with your own. You just need to look at what these people have developed. There are actually three sets of principles that underpin universal design applications in higher education. We talked about the web content accessibility guidelines, but I think it's also important to think about other things like the physical spaces that your computers are in. If a person can't even get to the computer, in a computer lab, then that's problematic. And so we can look at the web content accessibility. I mean, the universal design definition that I presented a few minutes ago, it has 7 universal design principles that deal with the physical environment, including enough space for a person to maneuver in a facility, even if they're using a real wheelchair, things like that. And so they're related to what we're doing in the Department of Justice ruling. And then there's also 3 universal design for learning principles. And those were developed by the CAST Center quite a few years ago. The UDL principles are really designed to focus in on the curriculum and the pedagogy in a class. And so we're getting more fine-tuned with those particular guidelines. Now there are 14 together, all together here. And so you can go back and spend some time working on those. Or I've kind of summarized them into 2 principles that kind of keep you on track, if you're particularly if you're a post-secondary institution. So as far as instruction and services and so forth, providing multiple ways for participants to learn or to access information on a website, to demonstrate what they have learned, and to engage. So that includes your grading in your class, the way you design your instruments for evaluating your students, and so forth. And as far as engagement, that there are multiple ways you can engage one-on-one using various tools. But then the second one is to ensure that all the technologies and the facilities, services, resources, and strategies are accessible to individuals with a wide variety of disabilities. And so there we get in, we could even talk about these 4 people again and think, well, is this facility accessible to Hadi? How about to Zane and so forth? Think about people with different types of disabilities. How are they going to get here into this space, and how are they going to use this space? Including online presentations and things. How can they participate equally? Making sure your slides are accessible, like I mentioned earlier. So, kind of winding up on universal design, it promotes best practices. It does not lower standards. And so don't think about it as lowering a standard in a class or making the website that you're creating unattractive. That's not the case. So we're not trying to lower standards with universal design, and it has to be proactive. It can be implemented incrementally. When I talk to faculty, sometimes they can be overwhelmed with how to make their class accessible. I was at a social gathering last night of some faculty, and I got cornered. And how can we make our classes accessible? They're really nervous about this. And I said, I'm glad you're really paying attention to this because it's important, but also kind of think long term and incrementally. Start with something. This person had, do you have a lot of videos? And she told me how she did those. Make sure that they're captioned accurately. And do you use a PDF for your syllabus? And the answer was yes. And so, well, PDF can be difficult to make accessible. You can learn to do it, but you can make it easier as far as accessibility if you just put your syllabus in the content management page and perhaps have a web or a downloadable version in Word, because some people like to have their syllabus on their desktop to edit it and so forth with their notes for how they're going to succeed in the class. And so, think about incrementally. The Department of Justice ruling will be enforced, but you don't. I mean, don't worry about the police to be at your back door immediately. Get a plan in place and just keep plugging along, making your course more inclusive. And ideally, universal design benefits everyone. It's not just focused on technical accessibility for people who are disabilities, but you take that broader perspective, which the standards do. Um, it benefits a lot of different people, including English language learners. They're really beneficiaries of, of accurate captioning on your videos, for example, and minimizes the need for accommodations. So in theory, if we all made our courses accessible here at the University of Washington or at the institution you're from, then we wouldn't need as many accommodations. We will still need some accommodations. I don't think we're going to provide a sign language interpreter in every class just in case somebody needs one. So that's in the accommodation category, but we need systems in place to make sure those accommodations can be provided. And it actually supports diversity, equity, inclusion if that's one of your goals in your organization. So the first one was kind of coming up with your kind of your framework on how you're going to think about compliance with the Department of Justice ruling. When you're if you're hiring new staff or you're retraining some existing staff, kind of think about a team where they know a lot about accessibility as a group, but some of them have specialties. So they don't have to know everything about everything. And so having a team where there might be someone that specializes in videos, they become the expert on accessible video design. The rest of the team knows something about it, but they could provide some more of the in-depth expertise. So kind of have a diverse group of people, provide training to them and then to their the people that they serve, and other support services. So you'll find in the case of the IT accessibility team, they provided training, for instance, in terms of videos, um, and they are videos of webinars that were offered in the past, and then they make them available in the accessible IT website. Um, so in the IT accessibility team, then back then, and I assume I don't work there anymore, but so I'm not sure exactly what the makeup is. I know they hired some more staff, so that's good. But we had an IT accessibility specialist back in the day, and still do, and then someone that really focuses on document accessibility, and somebody who's an IT accessibility specialist to testing products, working with vendors to make sure that they're compliant with our accessibility um, standards. And then we have an accessibility developer. We have Access Technology Lab Manager. If you haven't been there, you might want to stop by if you're nearby, down in Mary Gates Hall. And then we have someone that has expertise in Braille production. And we then have student employees, and some of them specialize, like in captioning, recaptioning videos, doing the editing, and an instruction accessibility specialist. And I think they hired a lead digital accessibility consultant, but I'm not sure if that's true. So not when I was there, but all those other people were there when I was there. So having a mix of staff, it's not everybody has the same expertise, I think is a good thing to do, and have them work very closely together. Ensure that the technology team engages in campus units and professional organizations. So making sure that they can go out there. And one of the most important conferences is, I think, for that team is to go to Accessing Higher Ground. And then there's a group called Athen. It's a great online group to share stories, share challenging issues as far as accessibility and so forth. And the IT accessibility team on the UW campus has engaged for years with the ADA compliance coordinator, now with the new deputy ADA coordinator for digital accessibility. Uh, be sure to include disability resources for students. They have a lot of expertise in this area. And disability services office, that's what we call it at the University of Washington, but that's the office for faculty and staff who have disabilities. So don't forget that group. It's often separate from the service group for students. Continuum College, that's where we're from in this presentation today. We worked closely with the Teaching and Learning Center, UW libraries, procurement, IT support staff within other campus units. And so dot, 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 you can think about different units. Who are you going to partner with? Who are you going to engage with? And there again, we're bringing in expertise to the team that goes beyond even the IT accessibility team. There are various organizations, as I mentioned. The Association for Higher Education and Disability is a good one. That's for disability services coordinators and counselors. But they do a lot in IT these days because they have to provide accommodations. Remember, when the IT is inaccessible, so they often work with the IT organizations, but they also have expertise themselves, particularly to make documents accessible and to remediate um, videos. For specific students with disabilities, and they're definitely mostly a reactive organization, but many of them promote universal design as well when they have a chance. And I already mentioned ATHEN, the Access Technology Higher Education Network. It's good to become part of that network. So Google that and join them. And then EDUCAUSE IT accessibility community group that you might find useful. Another group that's very exciting is the Teach Access group. It started with Microsoft and Google and other technology companies because they were frustrated. Why? Because they want to hire people that have accessibility expertise and they can't find enough of them. And so because computer science and IT degrees programs around the country don't always cover accessibility in their curriculum, they're really pushing that agenda. And so they work directly with faculty, they give presentations at conferences, but also at different institutions and encourage faculty to include accessibility. And as I've been involved with some of those presentations, they will provide some tips because often faculty members don't know about accessibility, and so they're reluctant to include it. But they come up with good tips on how you can get started and have a little bit of accessibility in the classes you're teaching. So the next generation of computer science and IT professionals will know about accessibility and get hired by these companies that want them. So tip number 4, um, even though we have a deadline, large institutions, in April of 2026. That's not that far away. And smaller institutions get a little extra, they get an extra year. That's not that far away either. So even though you have these immediate needs, I encourage you to think of the structure for a long-term engagement. This isn't going to be a done thing, one done thing. Some schools have jumped quickly to hiring consultants to test their websites and whatever for accessibility. Unless you have that part of your long-term engagement plan, you'll find out that you have a lot of websites that aren't accessible, but what are you going to do about it? Just knowing they're inaccessible hasn't gotten you further toward accessibility unless you have a plan for dealing with the accessibility problems. And every campus, even including the University of Washington, even though they've been very active in this area, has accessibility problems as far as IT. So you can find them. So if you're doing some of the consultants, you want to do that testing, make sure you can respond right away. Also, those when you get that report on what's inaccessible, that may not be valid a year from that point. People are making changes in their websites all the time. And so you might not be able to use it effectively if you don't get on it right away. And so three important groups, or four, I guess, that you might want to think about is did this years ago at the University of Washington, is an ADA and accessibility steering committee. And this is about all aspects of the ADA. And there are the IT group, Accessible IT, is represented in that group. But I think it's really important for the campus to be looking more broadly than just IT when it comes to ADA compliance. So you might want to have that. Um, and that comes out of our risk assurance office, ADA compliance officer leads that group. Then there's a need for a group that's kind of a task force where they're just out there making changes, people that know something about accessibility and are good positions to promote it. Um, and then they can share with each other what they're doing in their various units and also make recommendations to the administration on the priorities from one year to the next. So that's kind of a boots on the ground, middle management, get things done sort of group. And then there's the IT accessibility team that I've talked about. Those are your staff, in our case, that are out there doing work. And then we found what we needed one more group, and that is we need a lot of people that know a little bit, and we have a lot of people that don't know anything about accessibility, but some of are interested and we want to encourage people to know about accessibility. So years ago, we started the IT Accessibility Liaisons group. It's an informal group. They're all part of a discussion list where they can share experiences and post questions and so forth. And they have 3 half-day meetings a year. And those are focused on specific aspects of accessibility, document accessibility, maybe video accessibility and so forth. And so this is a chance for people that are motivated to learn more and are in positions where maybe they can promote accessibility within their units. And we've had great examples of outcomes of that particular group. In the business school, for example, one of the liaisons who was from the business school in their IT group, he decided to promote the idea in the business school that all videos that faculty members create or use will be captioned centrally. My husband happens to be in the business school, and I said, "Well, how do they caption your videos?" And he said, "Well, I don't know." He doesn't have to worry about that, so that there is room for the departments to take over some responsibility here and take that burden off of faculty members or service providers for that matter. Another group in the College of Education, they have uh, people trained within their IT group, trained on making courses accessible. And they offer regular training on IT accessibility for courses. And our social work department for years have had a group that remediate documents for faculty. Anyone that needs a document remediated, they can go through that group. So really looking to not the central resources, but also individual resources in departments and colleges is good. And the liaisons group can kind of stimulate that sort of thing. So the fifth tip, create a comprehensive website with legal issues, policies, guidelines, exemplary practices, and resources. And so the University of Washington has one. You might want to take a look at it, uw.edu/access tech. And you'll find a lot of the specifics on what's going on today, and their reaction to the Department of Justice ruling, or different groups that are in effect where it'll describe what they do and so forth, and then offer trainings along with that. So we've got the comprehensive website. We have the trainings. As I said, we record them and put them up on our website, and so they're always there. And then if we offer the training again, then it's recorded and put up there on the website. And then working within Teaching and Learning Center and other groups, so that they too will apply IT accessibility guidelines. Teaching and Learning Center, when I was at the university, uh, they weren't teaching anything about IT accessibility, but they did have some IT courses and teaching with IT. And I found a good way to get my foot in the door back then, was to offer to give a guest lecture or discussion, whatever they wanted, for one of their class sessions. And I never had anybody turn me down for that. Because many times these instructors they don't know enough to teach it, and they get worried about it. And several times then they'd say, well, they didn't need me to do it anymore because I kind of gave them a model of what to present. And you can't present all about IT accessibility. You wouldn't in a class like that, but they could learn that amount of information that they wanted to present. So trainings, all types of trainings, long, short, online, on-site, whatever. So tip 6, purchase and license tools. There are some tools. I went to a presentation at the University of Washington very recently, actually at the Accessing Higher Ground Conference. And this probably maybe not be totally accurate now, but they have Enterprise Web Accessibility Checker, a domain discovery tool, PDF remediation tool, census access documents for making your documents accessible. And then we have Blackboard Alley that we have used in our Canvas learning environment. So this isn't recommending those, but it's just an example of some tools. If you join the Athens list, as I mentioned, you will hear recommendations for tools. You can say there are just a lot of them out there. And so you can say, well, I'm really looking for an accessibility checker. What has anybody had experience with these 3 products? And that'll get you started with that. And then offer incentives and rewards and make it fun. We decided years ago, around the time that Policy 188 came around, that we're going to give capacity building awards. It's that the capacity building awards are for campus units that are making exceptional progress as far as IT accessibility. All they get is a certificate in a frame, but people get recognition for what they're doing. Centrally funded captioning. Years ago, I was able to get this central organization, it was out of the provost office, to give me $20,000 where we would freely caption high impact videos. So we could go out and look for videos that get a lot of traffic in YouTube, that are high level groups like deans of business schools and so forth, those offices. And we'd offer to caption them, and in exchange for them learning how to caption their videos and committing to capturing their videos in the future. And then competitions. Uh, we had a competition years ago for capturing all the videos of there are over 50 units that have their videos on YouTube in these specific channels. And so they competed to get a 100% rate of capturing videos, and they were neck and neck and competing for that prize or that position. So try to think about doing stuff like that. I mentioned Teach Access already, but particularly your faculty in computer science and IT, make sure that they know about Teach Access. Make sure that they know that companies are asking for students who have expertise in IT, but also accessibility. And then we adopted a model. This is just a visual representation of the steps we went through. And when we adopted policy 188. And it kind of ended up with some key points, I think, to for you to consider. Always go to your vision. Look at your campus vision. What are your values? University of Washington, we found values of diversity, equity, inclusion. We also found certainly values of compliance. And so we need to comply with laws and regulations. And so it's as simple as that. But also we want to support all of our students equally. Then a framework. Again, you can use the Universal Design Higher Education Framework or some other framework, but come up with something that organizes your thoughts. How are you kind of measuring your success? What are you shooting for? And then kind of make a list of your current practices and then the new practices. And sometimes you'll find at some institutions that the current practices are mainly learning about accommodations, but with your new practices, you want more proactive design. And so think about how you can kind of shift that training gradually. And then come up with some measures, your outputs, your outcomes, and impacts as far as your vision and your values, and then modify those practices. I found that when we had a task list and we're making changes, and then we go back and we kind of review them and move on, it was very helpful and stimulating, and it gave ourselves a pat on the back for what we accomplished, not thinking so much always about how much work remained to be done. And so if you want to apply it to digital accessibility, that model, it's like, what is your vision? Maybe that the IT procured, developed, and used at your institution is accessible and usable. And what are your values? Figure out what yours are. Look at your website. What does the president say? And how does IT accessibility fit with those values? And then have your framework. You could use the universal design one, for example, but scope it out, organize it, and with only those things that apply to IT. And then the current and new practices and the outputs and outcomes and the impacts. So there's a model. You can kind of start that as a draft and figure out what you want to do for yours. And tip number 10, undertake reactive and proactive approaches. Both are important. We're not saying get away from reactive. If a student with a disability is having trouble using IT, get on it and take a reactive approach to make them successful. Work top down and bottom up, and even middle out. I mentioned our task force. This is a middle out organization, middle managers, and they can have some influence above and below. We have a volunteer group in that arena. Sometimes some campuses actually assign people from different organizations to be part of those groups, and try to push for long-term impact. So not just making a website accessible, but how are you going to be checking on it periodically to make sure that it doesn't lose some of the accessibility that you built in as it gets updated over time. So look at compliance with the Department of Justice rule, not just as a lot of work, which it is a lot of work. Part of it is because we haven't been doing this stuff as much as we should have over the years. But it's an opportunity to take steps that will lead to a more inclusive institution, community, society. That's not all bad. And also enjoy the journey. Try to give yourself credit and reward yourself for the journey you're on. Don't think of it as a sprint that you run the race and it's all over in a matter of minutes. So I put some resources on the screen, and I think we're going to make these slides available. Am I right, Stacy? Yeah. But if you can't see the screen for whatever reason, I've got the Department of Justice rule. If you want to read the whole thing, that's great. If you are up for that, I recommend reading the Department of Justice rule fact sheet. So yeah, that one will give you the highlights, and probably be enough for most people. And then the Department of Justice final rule itself. And so the UW accessible technology, I mentioned that as uw.edu/access tech. When we started that website many years ago, since we're a large institution, we made an effort to make many of those resources appropriate for any institution. So if you're a smaller school and you think, well, we don't have the resources, well, take a look there at other places where you can just link to ours. That's, you don't have to reinvent the wheel. And if you're worried about that, well, just give us credit. Give credit to the institution you're linking to, and that should take care of it. And then there's the Center for Universal Design and Education has more um, resources as far as applying universal design. So that takes us through this content.
Okay, are you ready for me
Yeah.
to
Getting any
jump back
questions
in
coming up?
here? Um, if you can advance the deck by one, thank you. So, in an effort to keep the momentum going, right, and build a strong foundation, I wanted to circle back to what I mentioned at the very beginning is this incredible course that Cheryl has developed and will be teaching starting in April. The course itself is for non-technical professionals. Compliance, this is just a broad range of types of professions. It's not inclusive to all, but just to give an idea. So non-technical professionals, those who might be compliance coordinators, program administrators, social service professionals, disability service providers, educators, those that create content, and anyone who advocates in any field that might want to be more comfortable with a broad range of issues in making digital technology more accessible to those with diverse abilities. Um, and I also want to note we're definitely a good fit for those with technical backgrounds as well. But we just want to be really clear in sharing information about this course that prior experience with technology is not required to be successful. Learners in the course will be introduced to legal considerations, assistive technology, design approaches, as well as principles, strategies, and resources that focus on responsive and inclusive design to make content welcoming and accessible and usable. Students will apply their learning to development of digital content, as well as we have two culminating um, assignments as part of that course. One to make an accessibility plan for an organization, and then a individual accessibility plan, a learning plan. More information is included in the link that is available when you receive the slide deck. Everyone that RSVP'd will receive a copy of the slide deck and also a copy of the recording. I do think that'll take a couple days, but it will be coming to you. The very next slide, Cheryl, if you wouldn't mind advancing real quick, is just calling out, oh, I forgot to update this one in your deck. That's okay. We can stop the share. Um, Tomorrow night, there's a presentation on social media marketing, so the future of social media marketing that I want to encourage folks that are just interested to keep learning to join in on. And then on Thursday, I'll be back with members of my editing certificate team to have a conversation around editing and AI. So if either of those topics interest you, I will fix this particular slide in the deck when it goes out so everyone has the correct resources. I love a great example of a human error. So my apologies for that. I did want to note um, a few of the questions here. So we did have one that came from the earlier slide where you were explaining who benefits from WCAG. The example where Hadi is a student, one of our guests this evening was interested in knowing what Jessie's needs were, and if she was a slow processor when you featured her. So her particular needs and how she benefits from WCAG principles.
Yeah. So Jesse, as far as using her, uh, you know, dictating into her content, that's fine. It was the documents that she usually runs into problems with, and often it's PDFs that are not designed to be accessible to her because she uses this text to speech software, and so that software reads the text on the screen, and so she always needs access to that text, and so that's her issue. So in a class, for example, she would need to have all the documents that are used in that class be accessible to her. And WCAG, there is guidance on making sure that the text is accessible. It's one of the principles, and they are guidelines, and there are practices as well. So that's how it ties in with WCAG.
Thank you, Cheryl. I'm responding to another question about a later date for the course offering, and I can talk faster than I can type. So I will say that yes, it is our intent to run this course again in autumn quarter 2025. So that'll be in October of this year. It's too early to apply for that offering, but watch the space, and I'm using watch broadly here. Visit the program website, the link from the prior um, page in the deck here, and you can find more information, such as when that application date opens. It's likely in the summer. I'm pretty sure I picked summer. I'm sorry. I don't remember the exact date, but yes, we will definitely um, offer the course as many times as we can moving forward. We have another question that was around Dubbot. And I just want to state that in the middle of your presentation, Cheryl, I don't know if you were watching um, the messages that we get to see, but I reached out to Accessible Technology to ask a question about Dubbot, picking out certain technical terms which are not misspelled and identifying them as misspelled. And so that's being reported for them to investigate and fix. So thank you for that question that we received, right? Live in the moment, working on improving the access for the users of that tool. We have another question here from Anna. And it's, sorry, I realize no one else can see who's in the room with us. The question is around how long alt text for different types of images should be. And then the statement here is when I write alt text, I tend to write long descriptions because I want blind persons to be able to enjoy the image as much as possible. But I've been told my descriptions are sometimes too long. Any guidelines or suggestions?
Well, I can give a suggestion from one of our actually participants in our community. On our website, she happens to be blind and uses caption, uses alternative text. And so she accessed our new website, the Do It website. This is many years ago now. And she said, thank you very much for including an alternative text for the Do It logo. And also thank you for not telling me what it looks like. So she says, I'll never see it. It doesn't really matter to me, but I'm glad that I know what I missed. And so I think keeping it short is better. It's not about making the experience exactly like someone with vision. You never can do that exactly. Anyway, what I try to look at is imagine that you're talking to a student on the phone and you have some slides that you're referring to, but they don't have access to them at that moment. And if you're taking a look at an image that you have, how would you describe, what would you describe that image presents? What is the content it presents? Not exactly what it looks like.
I'd also like to add that the Accessible Technology website here at UW has great resources and tips
Hmm.
for writing alt text. And
Yes.
that's a resource that is available to anyone. You
Hmm.
do not need to be a UW student or UW affiliate. That is out there for public use. So just another tool that's available. And then we have a question on the best approach to start the accessibility path and how organizations can recognize the importance of accessibility in their process. Well, we have a course for that.
Yes. Uh, so how to get started, an organization started?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you can promote accessibility in a number of ways. It's the right thing to do. We want to make sure that all of our students have access, let's say, to our classes and so forth. So it can really echo the values of an organization. And if you have those values in your organization, then that's good to emphasize those. Not all organizations do. And so you might want to emphasize the requirements, that it's a requirement. This isn't just out of the goodness of our heart. We're required to make sure that the IT is accessible to people with disabilities. And by golly, we have a way of doing it. Look at the Department of Justice ruling, and it'll tell us what to do. Again, there are a lot of guidelines there, a lot to be done. And I think it's important then also to sell it. The whole idea is to prioritize. What are we going to work on first so we don't get overwhelmed? And then to also look at internal resources in a department or a college or a school. Almost all of them now have some IT person there or several people provide IT support. That's a good home for promoting accessible IT in your unit. So again, I'd like to recommend looking big picture. How does this fit in with our values? What I find with faculty and others when they really push back hard, um, it's not because they don't think that things should be accessible to students with disabilities. It's that they're overwhelmed by not knowing how to do it. And then also that they don't have the time to do it. And so they usually have a good intention, but they have those issues. And so providing a safe space so faculty members can talk about that and brainstorm how they can make their job easier. Using resources from the central organization's IT accessibility page, for example, and publications that come out, things like that, but also direct services.
Okay, I think I've got the last question here, which I'm typing the link. It's for the Access Technology team.
Mhm.
They are, let me hit send on that. Um, so we had a question that relates to being here at UW. Um, so for interdisciplinary students or students that are in disciplines that are not specifically addressing accessibility inclusion here at the university, and they're looking for either a mentor, a guide, a resource, is there a department or group that they can meet with? Um, and I have shared Access Technology Team's help page. Um,
Is this somebody that might want to join the liaisons group?
and I can also add that. I think that's on the page I just put. And
Yeah,
so the
let's
Accessibility
see.
Liaison Group is also something that's open to anybody in the UW
Mm-hmm,
community.
mm-hmm.
Let me get that. My page will load. There we go. And I'm going to put that. I realize I am not typing in the chat. Sorry. Okay, so I recognize not everyone that is with us is here at UW and therefore
Yes.
cannot access this tool. But it would be something that would be great at any institution, regardless of it being higher ed or in the private sector. But the liaison group is an opt-in opportunity for those that are interested. I'm a part of it. I oftentimes am in an observing mode where I can learn from others as they ask questions and others on that group are comfortable responding, share their resources. And it is really rewarding, and I would encourage that for anyone affiliated with UW. And then I'll go back again because the Access Technology team, the group that Cheryl founded, um, is another one of our, not another one, they really are, besides the ADA office here, um, the best point of contact for anything and everything related to accessibility, whether you're a faculty, student, staff. So a great place to go for help. They offer a number on their website. This is the resource I'm recommending, a number of free publicly accessible tools,
Mhm.
resources, um, in some cases, almost anything you can think of. I don't want to oversell, but they are an amazing group. They have compiled, and Cheryl, thank you, a lot of it done under her leadership. Just an amazing source, again, that is available for anyone to benefit from. So definitely check out what they're able to offer. And then our final question of the evening is guidance on making maps accessible. So something
Oh,
very
wow.
visual.
Yeah. Uh, they can be quite complex. But there is expertise certainly in the IT accessibility team. I really would recommend you talk to Terrell Thompson. He's done a lot of work in this area, and he would love to hear from you. Tell about the wonderful things he's done. But the group has spent quite a bit of time on web map accessibility.
And I'll add as part of that, that last link that I have added into the chat. Um, when you're on their website, they have a tab for making things accessible. So you can go through a bunch of different options. And media images documents are part of that.
Mhm.
So I would definitely recommend checking that out as well, in addition to reaching out um, to Terrell.
Yeah, and one point about that too, if you're working in that area, is get a collaborative team together. I know Terrell has worked with physical space and the ADA compliance officer and others interested in accessible maps. He's not doing it all by himself, although he often does the heavy lifting.
Okay. And so with that, I again wish to express my gratitude um, to our guests this evening, or actually, you might be anywhere in the world. Thank you for giving us your time to join us tonight, and thank you as always, Cheryl, the incredible Cheryl Bergstaller, for her amazing support, advocacy, and openness to always share her experiences. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Again, everyone will get a copy of the deck and the recording. And if we don't see you in one of our upcoming courses on this topic, we wish you well as you continue your accessibility journey. Thank you so much.